All right. Hello, here I am giving you a little bit of an extra assignment because of my sickness. It doesn't look like I'm terribly sick. I have COVID, um, and so I'm quarantined. That's why we're doing this. I'm sorry about that. I had no idea I had COVID. But at any rate, what made me think to go get tested is that Dr. Pepper didn't taste right, of all things. So what we're doing in this particular video, I want to clarify some things, basically starting from chapter 1. I'm going to fly through just a couple ideas. One, I want to make sure that we have some clear understanding of what the value of intrinsic and the difference between intrinsic and instrumental good is, or instrumental valuable. So instrumentally good and intrinsically good is the way I'm going to differentiate it. And then it's a little bit different than our in our text. So intrinsically good is something you really like. Let's say let's use music as an example. Pick a tune that you really like, your favorite tune. I don't know what that is. But let's say your tune has a good drum beat. It has good lyrics. You like the tune. Has really good supporting kind of tunes to it. It has some the melody, and then you have some background bass, and you have some background other parts that aren't part of the melody. But you have these parts to it that all make a really full sound that you really, really like. And it may have other things to it. It might have other instruments. For instance, it might have a brass band. It may just have drums, or it might have people doing the bebop thing with their mouth and whatever that's called. They can make the whole sound of instrumentations with their mouth, and or might have an organ, or might have a piano, have a guitar, um, and then background singers might have those things. I don't know what they are, but all those are different parts. Those are instruments of what make the whole thing good. And so they are instrumentally good because they'll help in different functions of the song, of the music you like, whether it be the tune or the beat, or to bring out the fullness of it. And someone might use some sort of instrument panel and do some tweaks with it. But those are all instruments. Intrinsically good is that song that you like. You just love that song and it's your favorite. You listen to it a lot. Well, that's the difference between intrinsically valuable and instrumentally good. Um, you have a lot of little instruments that will add up to something to make it really, really valuable. I wanted to land on that or start with that in this chapter 1 because it really does start with this on page 23. And it talks about hedonism in chapter 1. And I'm going to just kind of fly through it just to make sure we're covering it. Hedonism is this idea that we don't have a lot of pain, but we're gaining a lot of things we really like. Happiness, for instance, pleasure. But we're a lot of pleasure and very little pain, and really that's what hedonism is. And I don't know of anyone that isn't to some degree a hedonist. Even the most astute, say, Christian, even the Pope is a hedonist, because who wants pain? I mean, that's called a masochist, right? So a hedonist is one who wants pleasure, but not pain. And there are different kinds of people and the way they look at this. And some of our philosophers in the past would say, well, If you're really a good hedonist, you will be interested in the things that give you pleasure aren't physical necessarily. They aren't necessarily money, but they are something that will give you philosophical contemplation. This is where Aristotle and Plato landed. And even John Stuart Mill had this idea that intellectual and artistic pleasure is more important than the mere physical pleasure. Physical pleasure could be sex, it could be drugs, it could be just sleep. So whatever brings you pleasure. But here's the deal. Whatever brings you pleasure doesn't necessarily bring me pleasure, right? And that's really what Plato and Aristotle, John Stuart Mill, and other people are pointing out. Hey, just because it's pleasurable to you doesn't necessarily mean it is to me. I like different movies than you like. I like different sports, maybe, and so on. You kind of get the picture. I like Dr. Pepper, but with this COVID-19, it doesn't taste very good at all. I don't even like Dr. Pepper, which is sad. But here's the deal. What if you enjoy giving pain to other people? What if you enjoy receiving pain? Well, is that pleasurable to you? It confuses the mind of some people, but still that's a hedonist, and they get pleasure from those things. Well, so anyway, that's what chapter 1 is really talking about. And some would say that, well, in order to have a really good life, you also have to have a good education, and you have to have money, and you have to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or you got to have someone special in your life. You've got to have a car. And so, well, who knows? Yeah, those might be up to you. That might be something you want if they make you happier, but they don't necessarily meet the requirements of everyone's idea of pleasure. And therefore, we have a challenge. And philosophers want everyone to agree on the same thing when we're talking about things, and we don't with anything, really. And that's the point. With philosophy, even hedonists can't agree, because we have different ideas of what brings pleasure. What's your favorite color? What's your favorite vehicle? What's your favorite show? And so on. What's your favorite food? We all have differences. I love a lot of things that you probably love, but I doubt if we line in on everything. So that's a real challenge. We need to make sure we understand what the desire satisfaction theory is, and the theory is that you can is that your satisfaction, your happiness, is brought to you by satisfying your desires. Well, I mean, in short, that sounds fine, and it sounds right. I mean, hey, I want eggs for breakfast. I want donuts and a Dr. Pepper for breakfast. Makes me happy. Doesn't necessarily make everyone happy, but that's my desire. And that's what brings me satisfaction. The problem is that there's what they call a paradox of hedonism that doesn't really bring you the satisfaction you think it does. So in one of the other assignments, I have you go over chapter 2, and I'm not going to go over chapter 2 too much here, because there are questions for that and short answers that I want you to look it up on your own. In chapter 3 and 4, then, it talks about getting what you want. It's, again, the desire satisfaction theory, and leading to getting all the instrumentally good things to bring up to an intrinsically really happy, really good life, to fulfill all of your desires. Now, this happens in several different ways. It doesn't necessarily happen to anybody, but it doesn't necessarily happen to anyone without this. You have autonomy. That is, you have the right to decide what you want. I can't decide for you. Now, as a professor, I can decide for you what it takes to get an A in the class, or what it will take for you to pass a certain quiz. You have to know these answers. But to for your own autonomy and to come up with your own desires, that's up to you. That's your autonomy. You make those decisions. I don't. But then some people will say, no, you've got to have education. You've got to have knowledge. You've got to, in order to be happy, you've got to have other things or money. And those are called objective values. People will say, no, you have to have certain objective ideals in order to be satisfied. And most people would say, no, you don't. And it's a huge argument within the field of philosophy. Do you have to have certain amount of knowledge to be happy? Do you have to have a certain amount of money to be happy? Do you have to have a certain amount of whatever to be happy? That's the question. Well, a lot of people, they're not sure what to say about that. Other people say, well, you need to have these things. And in fact, to really be happy, the only thing you need is an understanding of what it is you want to be happy about, or to get to be happy. And then secondly, you need to be motivated to get there. And they feel like if you have the motivation, then you'll be happy. Or knowledge is motivation enough. But we know that isn't true. A lot of people don't want to have cancer, but they're not motivated by the knowledge of knowing smoking will produce cancer. They're going to smoke anyway. They don't really give a rip about anything. That knowledge about receiving cancer isn't motivation enough for them to stop. That can be applied to other parts of our lives as well. So we can justify what we're doing by coming up with reasons why we want to do it. We don't care about cancer, or I really care about cancer. That either way is a justification. So on page 48, there's a justification for pursuing self-interest. That is, we justify, or we give reasons as to why we do our thing. That's justifying. It's giving a reason as to why you do it. It's like you're justified for doing something. Or there's justified for giving a warrant out for, say, my son's arrest for not paying a ticket. That's called a bench warrant. And the justification or the warrant for that is they didn't pay their ticket. So they're justified for giving a warrant for an arrest to do that because of that. That's just the reasoning as to why they do it. That's what justification is about. And that's a word that you'll need to know, what justification is. And then there's on page 49, it doesn't talk about this in the book as near as specifically as I'm going to here in this video. And you'll need to know this for the quiz and for the final. Okay. So what is good? Have you ever thought about defining something that's good? How do you define good itself? Well, that's a challenge, because good comes in several different forms. That good eats, it tastes really good, that looks really good. Well, how do we define good? Man, that runs really good. It should be runs well, by the way, but people will use good in different ways. It's actually an adjective. Good eats is different than a machine that is good because it runs well versus something else that might be maybe considered absolutely good. So here's a breakdown of what good is. There are three different breaks of what good is. One, it's functional. Okay. If you have a good coat, it's functional. If you have a good car, it's functional. If you have a good team, it's because they're doing well, right? Like the Chiefs, they're doing well. They're going to the Super Bowl, but they're functionally good because they can put together things and function uh, well as a team, or function well as a coat. It keeps out the cold. The coat might keep off the rain. That's how it functions. But we might say it's conventionally good if it just looks good on the runway for a model to wear, and we're thinking, now that is really good. Doesn't keep out the cold. It doesn't keep out the rain. But it is conventionally good because we vote on it. So things are functionally good when they function well. They're conventionally good if people just all agree and we say, hey, that's good. I like that. It's conventionally good, and like a convention, you're bringing people together, and then you vote on it. That's the one way to look at it. You do that with art, by the way. A picture on the wall or a picture someone has taken. Is that a really good picture or is that a bad picture? Well, people have to vote on that. It's not a functional thing. You can't say, well, it functions good as a picture because there's no function to it. It's conventionally good because everyone says, yeah, I like it. Or a lot of people say that. And they might have certain standards for this convention. They might say, oh, it's got to be in focus. Oh, it has to have so many colors, or it has to have a certain kind of scene. You need to be able to understand it, or it might be need to be really vague. I mean, depending on the kind of convention we have, is it something that we're looking for clarity, or something that we're looking for just kind of an idea of something? So you can see where conventionally good is different than functionally good. Well, something is good also just by saying it's good. Absolutely good. And there's a few things that would fall in this, but morality may be one of them. How do we know something is absolutely good? Are we going to vote on it? Like basically we have voted on abortion and have said, well, it's conventionally acceptable because, well, that's what the courts say, even though functionally it's not good for the life of the thing being aborted. So you can see the quandary and the pull and the tug of these moral issues, maybe with abortion especially. But what's good? There are three parts to good: functionally, conventional, and absolute. And absolute is probably the most vague, but it will create, it's kind of like what you would call the intrinsically good song. Oh man, that's a really good song. You know, that's absolutely good. No one else has to vote on it. You just feel like that it's a good song. And so, good. What is good? We'll be re-looking at this idea throughout the semester. So just remember it for now. Okay, so that's on page 49. And then in the next chapter, it talks about the problems that the desire theory has. And one of the problems is when you get your desires fulfilled, are they as good as you thought they would be? For instance, when you win a game, is it as good? I mean, it's usually an instrument to get to another game. It's instrumentally good to win a whole bunch of games. Each game has its own step. but you got to win a whole bunch of them to finally get to the big game, like the Super Bowl. Um, and but does it bring the desire and the satisfaction you thought it would bring? Well, John McEnroe on page 54 didn't feel it did. He was a tennis player. It was back in the 70s and 80s, I believe. And he was quite the tennis player. His big name, I remember hearing about him as a kid. And he won it all. Then he realized he wasn't happy. And he was mouthy. He had quite a mouth. He would really cut into the judges and other people quite a bit. I think he just wasn't a happy person on the inside anyway. But when he got everything he wanted, it didn't make him happy like he thought it would. There's a disappointment sometimes when we get what we want. And that's the point of this discussing about hedonism and the desire satisfaction theory. Is getting what you want really what you want? Is getting what you want really what you need? And sometimes people get what they want and don't realize it. And some people get what they want and they're not really getting what they want, because what they want is what other people may want. So it gets kind of confusing. But there's some paradoxes in getting what you want. For instance, I know people who cut themselves, and sad state as it is, they think it's going to help them. They think it's going to get better, and then they do that, and then it just doesn't. It's empty, and they don't understand why they do it. And I can't help them with that because I couldn't understand why they do it either. It's not something I've ever desired to do. It didn't make sense to me. But getting what they want didn't bring the satisfaction or the desire or the turnout that they thought they would get. So there's the problem. That getting what you really want doesn't always get you what you think you really want. Not a whole lot different can be said on that. But what he concludes with on page 60 is this. He says that we're forced to conclude that the good life depends on objective values. Things that are valuable, even if we fail to see the value in them. And that might be knowledge, or that might be something else. We don't know. But we're going to start this trek with our class on Friday. I'll be back, and we'll go from there. We're going to look at, we're going to jump from chapter 4 to chapter 19, okay? So be prepared for that. I want you to know that we're not going to just go straight through the book, all right? So give me a summary of this video, and I'll see you on Friday. There are 2 other written assignments to finish those for the week, and we'll go from there. Have a great day.